Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathan. I love movies and I want to share that with you. From old originals to cult classics and foreign favorites, along with straight up drivel, WWW is your place for all things movies. Stick around and we'll leave you with a movie to watch over the weekend with your family or that special someone. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Wednesdays, the show where we talk about 3 movies all in the same night. For tonight's episode, spring is in the air. We're back for spring quarter, and this show has not changed whatsoever. I have not changed as a host. You're still going to get the exact same level of quality that you got last quarter and the quarter before that. So good news for all you regular listeners. With that being said, let's move into what we're going to be talking about tonight. That's probably a very good idea. That's a probably very good idea. Anyways, tonight we are going to be tackling one of the most well-known iconic trilogies of all time when it comes to movies. If anything, this trilogy would fall into its own category as the most iconic superhero trilogy of all time. That's right, for those of you who haven't guessed it, or maybe you're just sitting there wondering, what trilogies has he not talked about quite yet? Tonight, we are going to be talking about the Dark Knight trilogy. Starting off with Batman Begins from 2005, following up with The Dark Knight from 2008, and closing out with The Dark Knight Rises from 2012. That is our watch list for tonight, and I'm very excited. Because I haven't talked about any Marvel movies on the show before, but I've talked about Batman before, especially last quarter. I did do a show on Batman, and in the back of my mind, I was going, I'm still going to have to talk about The Dark Knight eventually, because it's so well known. I kind of have to at some point in my life. And surprise, surprise, I feel like I have some interesting opinions on these movies that you may not hear everywhere else. That's what I try to provide here on the show. But that's getting ahead of myself. So before we get into that, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll jump into Batman Begins. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our first movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Batman Begins from 2005, available to watch now on Max. For the basic plot summary of Batman Begins, after being trained by the mysterious League of Shadows, Bruce Wayne returns to his hometown of Gotham City. There, he adopts his alter ego, the Batman, in case you couldn't guess by the title. And after adopting the alter ego of Batman, he must confront the dangerous criminal known as Scarecrow, played by Cillian Murphy, who is so amazing and underutilized. That's a different topic. We'll get into that later. Okay, so let's begin with Batman Begins, the beginning of the trilogy, the first one, the only one out of the 3 that doesn't have Dark Knight in the title. That is, I don't know why they did that. It makes this so much more annoying that they call it the Dark Knight trilogy, right? I mean, all the other Star Wars movies had Star Wars in the title, and Terminator had Terminator in all of its titles, and Matrix had Matrix in all of its titles. Why am I getting hung up on this? I'll stop getting hung up on it and just focus on the fact that, as a whole, Batman Begins was a new beginning for Batman. Aptly named, I guess, in that regard. But the point is that for it being the next Batman movie that was released to theaters after the atrocity that was Batman and Robin, there was a lot riding on it. There was pressure for it to be better than Batman and Robin, which is a very easy feat to accomplish. There was expectations, I'd suppose, of it being good in some way, shape, or form, or be worth watching. And to give you an overall impression that I have of Batman Begins, I'll be honest with you, it is worth watching. It's good in a way, but if I was to sit here and say that it's amazing, no. If I'm being honest, there are parts of Batman Begins that dip into mediocrity and kind of a sense of I'm forgetting this as I'm watching it, or I will forget this later. It's certainly not as memorable as the follow-ups. I almost said predecessor, but that's not the one that comes after it. The point is that Batman Begins, for the first one in the trilogy, it's just kind of which I don't want to be misconstrued as me saying that it's bad. By any stretch of the imagination, I'd say you couldn't do a worse job than Batman Begins did at being the first movie in the series, right? Movies that tend to get trilogies made out of them, you'd hope to be at least good. That's not always the case, granted, but movies that tend to get a series, big budget Hollywood blockbuster trilogies, tend to need to have a good first movie in order to get the ball rolling and get funding for the sequel, right? So you'd think that you'd hope desperately that the first movie is at least decent and worth going back to watch. And I can definitely say that Batman Begins pulls that off. Does that mean it's perfect? Absolutely not. It certainly has flaws in some areas. I'd say that it kind of starts to come apart at the seams. Almost said come apart at the seams. I'm very tired. It's the start of spring quarter, and I'm just having to deal with classes. Bear with me here. Here's the point about Batman Begins. Batman Begins is a well-crafted movie that just has decent enough execution. When I say decent enough, you may be thinking, does that mean it's bad execution? No, again, decent enough. It gets the point across. It achieves a goal. Does that mean that it doesn't bump in the road? No, it means it does bump in the road sometimes, but not to the point of derailing. What am I talking about? Here, I'll give you some good examples. The best example I can give you that I hinted to at the beginning of this review is, without any spoilers, Scarecrow is very underutilized. Scarecrow was a well-established character, an interesting idea, and a different take on what he could have been in the comics. Just a crazy guy who dressed up like an actual Scarecrow. In this iteration, it is Cillian Murphy with a burlap sack, right? It kind of he has this more psychologist feel to him, this cold and unrelenting attitude that makes him chilling to watch actually do anything on screen. Great portrayal, great performance, great characterization. Underutilized in the course of the movie that he's introduced in and every subsequent sequel. This goes for the entire trilogy, sure, but at the same time, I'd really want to emphasize it with Batman Begins because I feel like this would have been his movie to shine. There was so much in place for him to be the main antagonist. There was enough there that I feel like just tossing him to the side didn't work for me. I didn't like that conclusion at all. But that's just one example. Another interesting example that I will definitely harp on for the rest of the night, so be prepared, is not anything having to do with Christian Bale's performance or portrayal or him as a person or him as an actor, but the fact that Christian Bale, in my opinion, in my not so humble opinion, cannot do the Batman voice very well. And I noticed it very significantly in Batman Begins, because it's the first one where he's playing Batman. Let me do a very good emulation of what Christian Bale sounds like when he tries to do Batman. Hi, I'm Christian Bale. I'm Batman. Do you notice how it's really just my voice pitched down like a couple octaves? You don't even need to know music theory to understand that. Just think -2 down in terms of pitch, and that's basically what I just did with my voice. And it's a good representation of exactly what Christian Bale does with his voice when he's talking in the Batman voice. Right? Follow me here. It's not that difficult. In my opinion, it doesn't sound bad, but it doesn't sound great. It sounds a little silly. It sounds a little goofy. It feels a bit out of place. If anything, not anything to Christian Bale, because I know he has some opinions on this, but it makes it seem like Bruce Wayne, the character, isn't trying really hard to be tough. Or if anything, the exact inverse, which is kind of worse. I'd say it's actually the inverse and a lot worse, in that It sounds like Bruce Wayne is trying too hard to be tough. He has this weird complex where he's trying way, way too hard to be tough. But that's kind of how the character comes across through the performance. I wouldn't exactly say it's a mistake on the end of Christian Bale. I'd say Christian Bale was still a very good pick for the character of Bruce Wayne, and for the performance of Batman, he pulled it off well enough. So I can't exactly sit here and complain all day about it. I can just kind of nitpick it. One thing I definitely can't nitpick is the cast as a whole. Again, Cillian Murphy's a great choice, Christian Bale's a great choice, Michael Caine is a great choice. Those are just the three main ones. There's even Liam Neeson in there for a character I haven't even mentioned because it's pretty significant spoilers. But just keep in mind that the casting is something I can never complain about. And that will carry, especially true when we go into our next movie, that being The Dark Knight. So stick around for that. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our second movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at The Dark Knight from 2008, available to watch now on Max. For the basic plot summary of The Dark Knight, after the events of Batman Begins, Gotham City is now being threatened by a crazy person known as the Joker. Batman must confront and take down this crazy person because he is indeed a criminal. In order to take down the Joker, Batman is assisted by District Attorney Harvey Dent, who is nicknamed the White Knight. As this movie is called The Dark Knight, and there's a character called the White Knight, do you think there's significance between those two characters at all? Any interesting push and pull, any interesting dynamics, any interesting sort of characterization? If you're guessing yes, then my answer is no. Yes, I was about to say no as a joke, but you are absolutely right. There is interesting characterization. Unfortunately, it gets into spoilers, so we'll instead kind of take a backpedal. We'll backpedal a little bit and talk about Harvey Dent from the outset, from the beginning, something that isn't a spoiler at all. Harvey Dent is, in fact, dating Rachel. Who's Rachel, you may ask? Rachel is Bruce Wayne's childhood friend and love interest for Batman Begins and, by extension, The Dark Knight. Now, as I said, she's dating Harvey in this movie, which is an interesting choice, an interesting comparison. Weren't Bruce and Rachel childhood friends? Haven't they been friends for a long time? Doesn't Bruce care about her, and isn't Bruce interested in her? Yes, and yes, as a matter of fact. But it was very intentional to have them not be together in this movie. Again, it could get into spoilers for Batman Begins, but I won't spoil it. And I'll instead say that one thing you got to keep in mind about these movies is without Rachel being in them, Batman would have no character. I want to reiterate this. As much as I love the Michael Keaton movies, I will admit Batman had more of a characterization and a bit of a story arc, sure, and a bit of an attachment to characters, but it wasn't to the same level as he does in the Dark Knight trilogy. And that's shown in The Dark Knight, unsurprisingly, with his attachment to Rachel. It was shown in Batman Begins well enough, but with Dark Knight specifically, I think it's where it kind of comes to a head and you start to realize this is what's making this character grow and change over the course of these movies. She's the thing that he's holding on to. She's that normal life that he would have if he wasn't Batman right now, right? Follow me here. Without Rachel, this would just be Batman being himself, all dark and brooding, trapped in his mansion all the time, never going out, right? Now, here's the thing. This is both a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing in that it makes the character more interesting and it makes the movie have actual drama. It's quote unquote a bad thing because it's actually frustrating how much drama it adds to the story. It's actually frustrating to watch Bruce get so incredibly hung up on Rachel that he will drop everything to go save her. I am not saying he shouldn't be doing that. I am not saying that it doesn't make sense. I am not saying it is unmotivated. I am not saying any of that. I am not saying it's bad writing. I'm not saying it's a bad performance. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. What I'm saying is, if anything, It's really good execution of a well-established idea of having someone be way too hung up on the person they can't have, the one that got away, and a really good execution of what happens when you drop everything for the one person you care about over the so-called greater good. What I'm saying is, it's frustrating sometimes to watch a movie that gets the writing done so well. When it gets the writing that right, that correct, that in-depth, that on the nose. It's sometimes just so frustrating to watch these characters have a good arc, right? That's what I'm getting at. It's just kind of stressful to watch these characters come to life and have these real life human emotions that you watch on screen. And all of this from Batman, keep in mind. With all that being said, you'd think that I would consider The Dark Knight to be an absolute masterpiece, like a lot of people do. Let me tell you something about The Dark Knight. Despite everything I just said, I don't think the movie overall is a masterpiece. I think that specific element is really well done, and it is stressful to watch. It's frustrating, but it generates emotion out of me. I'm not saying that The Dark Knight is a bad movie. Again, with Batman Begins, I won't say it's a bad movie at all. But at the same time, I did say it's a well-known concept to have the one that got away, to have the damsel in distress that the hero drops everything to go get. It's not exactly revolutionary. But there is one thing about The Dark Knight that is revolutionary. The one thing that people remember the most. The thing that, in my opinion, is both the best and worst parts of The Dark Knight. Despite the great casting choices thus far, the best one is The Dark Knight. I've hyped it up so much now that you know exactly what I'm going to talk about. Let's, in our last couple minutes of reviewing The Dark Knight, talk about Heath Ledger. Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker, the late, great Heath Ledger, rest in peace. Here's the thing about Heath Ledger. He is good. He is great, actually. No, he's amazing. No, he is almost in every way a perfect performance of such an unhinged, unsympathetic, monstrous, disgusting, evil character. Heath Ledger's Joker is memorable for so many reasons, but the biggest one is how much he made the Joker his own while also being the Joker. Right? Now, that is both a good and a bad thing. It is a good thing for the audience experiencing it, including myself, where I'm sitting there and I am mesmerized by such an evil person brought to such real, intense life. Something about that, every part of it, not something, everything about it gave me chills. Every moment he opened his mouth, every tick, every little thing he did, the way he walked, the way he looked, the way he talked, everything about it gives you shivers. Everything about it is engaging, interesting to watch. I was glued to the screen the moment he shows up. The problem is the moment he walks off screen, the movie goes back to being Batman Begins with just better writing and some things improved here and there. That's actually legitimately frustrating in a sense of quality. Because if I'm being completely honest, I would say that people give The Dark Knight more credit than it deserves. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it doesn't deserve to be praised. What I'm saying is to call it one of the best movies of all time simply because Heath Ledger is perfect feels a little blindsided, a little, I suppose, nearsighted, farsighted, some way blind to the fact that the movie is not perfect, and if I'm being completely honest, is just Batman Begins with a new coat of paint and then the Joker thrown in there to elevate it to massive lengths. Again, it sounds like I should be saying that this is a masterpiece because of that. But I can't in good conscience say that. I legitimately, in good conscience, have slept on this, have figured it out, have worked it over in my head. And when I came down to it, I decided to myself, I knew what my opinion was. And my opinion was, The Dark Knight is just not as good as everybody says it is. It is overrated, but not in any way related to Heath Ledger. It is overrated because he is in there and people automatically think his performance made the movie perfect when only he was perfect. Anyways, with all that being said, talking about stuff that isn't perfect for sure, we're going to close out the night after the break with The Dark Knight Rises, so stick around for that. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our third and final movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at The Dark Knight Rises from 2012, available to watch now on Max. For the basic plot summary of The Dark Knight Rises, 8 years after the events of Dark Knight, Batman must now combat a less than favorable public image as he attempts to stop the terrorist Bane, who just kind of showed up one day and is here to destroy Gotham completely and totally. Rather unfortunate series of events, if you ask me. Now, moving on from that unfortunate series of events, let's talk about another unfortunate series of events. Because with the movie being released, there was an unfortunate series of people on the internet, or people just in general, coming to the conclusion that The Dark Knight Rises is the least good installment in the trilogy. That is the best way I can put it. It's the weakest one. It's not as good as the other two. It's not a very good follow-up from what The Dark Knight was. The Dark Knight Rises is just the weakest one in the trilogy. I, on the other hand, would wager that after seeing some real stinkers of third movies, and also having seen some really good examples of third movies, I would say that The Dark Knight Rises could have been a whole lot worse. People don't give it enough credit, in my opinion. I think The Dark Knight Rises is a little bit underrated, and if anything, I'd call it better than Batman Begins in some aspects. Only a couple, but the ones that it's better in my opinion, actually make it just a better overall experience. Now, again, with the contrast of The Dark Knight and the one individual element not making it a lot better, then we'll get into it. Let's tackle the main reason that I would consider this to be a better movie than Batman Begins, and just kind of underrated as a whole. I would say that The Dark Knight Rises is a really good exploration of Bruce as a character. I liked the state he was in at the beginning of this movie because it's not him at his best. It's not even him at his half best. He's not even kind of still figuring himself out. He's been figured out for a while, but then he's been broken and he doesn't know how to figure himself out again. And now he's just really at his worst, at his lowest point that we've seen him at in this series so far. And with that being the case, it makes his rise a lot more interesting to watch. It makes the struggle for him more engaging to watch. Now, of course, some of it is not exactly earned because they do rush a little bit. I'll give it that. But at the same time, with just the basic idea of starting from nothing or starting from nearly nothing and then maybe losing more over the course of the movie, only to then pick himself back up, I'd consider this to be my preferred character arc for Bruce Wayne among these three movies. His character arc in The Dark Knight isn't as drastic as I feel the one in Dark Knight Rises is, and in Batman Begins, it's not a bad arc, but it is a origin story level of arc. It's the kind of thing that you'll see very often when a hero is beginning their journey, when they're first getting their powers or their abilities or getting their training together. It's a bit more generic. This feels more like that story that you look for kind of many years after the fact, when the hero is cynical and kind of disillusioned with his own capabilities and just kind of goes off and does his own thing, not really wanting to come back. Of course, then you could run into the generic plotline of, I'll do one last heist, I'll do one more job, I'll save the city one more time. But I feel like The Dark Knight doesn't fall, not The Dark Knight. Not The Dark Knight Rises doesn't fall into that category as much as it could have. If anything, there's a couple moments in there that are later on, so unfortunately spoilers I won't get into, but there are moments later on that do subvert those expectations, at least enough to the point where I'm going, okay, it's kind of a mix of more of an origin story, but not really, and not really Bruce's origin story, so it feels a bit different. It's an interesting flavor combination here. You're taking things that I already know and kind of mashing them together now, but for it being a third movie and for it being this series, I'm going to kind of excuse it and say that is understandable given the circumstances, if that made any sense. One thing we can actually break down and talk about more specifically that is not as abstract about The Dark Knight Rises is the fact that Bane, the literal terrorist who is attacking Gotham City and is threatening the city with a lot of forms of violence, talks a bit like this. He sounds like this. He's like, I was born in the darkness. I was raised by it. I was molded by it. That's not... I wish I was exaggerating when I tried recreating that, but if I'm being honest, I did a better job than I should have at recreating that voice. I'm not even kidding. I don't know. I know the story of how Tom Hardy came up with the voice for Bane. He said that he was watching videos about this like boxer who was part Romani and had this very distinctly high-pitched voice, and he showed it to Christopher Nolan, and he was like, we should try this for the character. It'll be interesting and different from what people are expecting. And on the one hand, that story now makes sense to me. Now I know where it came from. On the other hand, why did you choose to do that for a terrorist again? Can we kind of break that down a little bit? I know how it happened. I still don't think I understand why. I still don't think I really understand why he did it. I won't say it in the form of it was a good decision or a bad decision or a good idea or a bad idea. I will simply say that it certainly was a memorable choice that they made. That's all I have to say on the Bane voice. It's very memorable. I would say that honestly, The Dark Knight Rises is overall, if anything, a little more memorable than Batman Begins. I seemed to remember liking The Dark Knight Rises more than Batman Begins when I watched these movies a couple years ago. I seem to remember walking away with a better impression of Dark Knight Rises. I almost said Batman Forever again for some reason. I remember walking away with a better impression of The Dark Knight Rises than I did of Batman Begins. Batman Begins just didn't feel like the cutting-edge amazing thing that it could have been. Whereas The Dark Knight Rises felt like it was underrated, kind of that hidden one that people like to say wasn't as good, but in my opinion was as good. It's kind of the inverse problem of Alien 3, where people say it's better than it actually is. This one, people say it's worse than it actually is. And then you've got the inverted problem with The Dark Knight, where it's like people say it's a lot better than, in my opinion, it actually is. And that it's just an old interesting sort of concept. If anything, if you take anything away from tonight's episode, keep in mind that the Dark Knight trilogy has been interesting to go back and explore, because if anything, it's an interesting way to look at different types of trilogies throughout the years and see how we got to this point. That was way too abstract to end off the show. So instead, I'm going to say thank you all for listening in to What to Watch Wednesdays. I will be back next Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. here on 88.1 The Burg for another episode of What to Watch Wednesdays. Alongside that, I will be on this Saturday from 8 to 10 p.m. for an episode of What to Watch Weekends, where we'll be talking about The Batman from a couple years ago, alongside these three movies a bit more in depth. So please tune into that here on 88.1 The Burg. If you're interested in hearing any updates on What to Watch Wednesdays or What to Watch Weekends, either follow the Instagram account or subscribe to the YouTube channel at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces, on both platforms. And again, I will be here next Wednesday telling you all what to watch. Good night, everybody.